From the outside, Jerusalem looked like a superpower. The streets were packed, merchants shouted over crowded markets, thousands of pilgrims flooded through the gates every single day. Above it all stood the temple, massive, white, and untouchable. To the average person, it looked like nothing on earth could ever bring it down. But underneath the noise, the engine was failing. By the decade leading up to 70 AD, Jerusalem wasn't just unstable, it was a pressure cooker. For years, the ingredients had been boiling: brutal Roman occupation, heavy taxes, extremist insurgencies, and corrupt elites. But here's the wildest part. Daily life just kept moving anyway. People still bought groceries, they still went to work, they still grabbed a drink with friends under the shadow of the temple walls. The tension had become so normalized that most people didn't even realize they were walking on a landmine. And maybe that's the detail history always forgets until it's too late. Societies rarely collapse overnight. First, they learn how to tolerate the cracks, and Jerusalem had become terrifyingly good at tolerating the cracks. Everyone blamed a different enemy. Rome blamed the local rebels, the religious establishment blamed moral decay, the radicals blamed the sellouts. Everyone was convinced that someone else was ruining the country. Meanwhile, the traffic kept moving, the economy kept spinning. Which raises the ultimate question: what did it actually feel like to live inside Jerusalem while the city unconsciously marched toward its own destruction? To understand how a society breaks, you have to look at how people adapt. In Jerusalem, Roman soldiers were everywhere. They stood on the rooftops, guarding the fortress overlooking the temple, monitoring every crowd. They were a constant, suffocating reminder of who really held the remote control. But the threat outside wasn't the only problem. Inside the walls, political polarization was turning into a blood sport. According to the first-hand accounts of the historian Flavius Josephus, the city was splintering into radical factions. You had the Zealots, who wanted total war with Rome, you had the Moderates, who wanted diplomacy, and you had the Sicarii, literal dagger-wielding assassins who murdered political opponents in broad daylight, right in the middle of crowded festivals. And the public just adjusted. That's the psychological trap. Once terror becomes a daily routine, your brain stops treating warning signs like emergencies. You keep trading, working, and living your life, even as the floorboards are rotting right beneath your feet. Jerusalem still looked sacred, but it didn't feel safe. The closer the city got to the edge, the more the culture changed. Crowds grew paranoid, neighbors stopped trusting neighbors, rumors traveled faster than facts. Everyone could feel a storm coming. They just couldn't imagine how total the wreckage would be. Which begs the question, if the red flags were this obvious, why didn't people just pack up and leave?
There's a glitch in human psychology called normalcy bias. The closer a system gets to a total meltdown, the harder people try to convince themselves that everything is going to be fine. Jerusalem had survived crises before. Foreign empires had conquered them, and foreign empires had left. They'd survived riots, recessions, and bad rulers. To the average citizen, this wasn't the end of the world, it was just another bad news cycle. Plus, they had a psychological insurance policy. The temple. It dominated the skyline. It was one of the wonders of the ancient world. Historical records show that the population genuinely believed the city was divinely protected. They thought it was literally impossible for Jerusalem to fall. That belief paralyzed them. Leaving meant giving up everything: your house, your business, your retirement, your entire identity. Staying felt safer because staying preserved the illusion of normal life. But while the citizens clung to comfort, the political fractures got deeper. Factions weren't just arguing anymore, they were actively fighting for territory inside the city walls. And while they fought each other, Rome began moving its armies into position. Jerusalem wasn't dealing with a single crisis. It was experiencing a multi-system failure. Political paralysis, domestic terrorism, hyperinflation, foreign invasion. When all of those variables collide in a hyper-congested city, collapse stops being a worst-case scenario. It becomes basic math.
By the time the population realized the danger was real, the trap had already snapped shut. In 70 AD, the Roman general Titus surrounded Jerusalem, cutting off all escape. But the real horror story wasn't what the Romans were doing outside the walls, it was what the factions were doing inside. Food supplies started running low, but trust ran out instantly. Josephus documents one of the most self-destructive acts in military history. The radical factions inside the city got into a turf war over who would lead the resistance. In a desperate bid to force the civilian population to stop hoarding food and fight, rival factions intentionally burned the city's massive, years-long storehouses of grain. They literally weaponized starvation against their own people. The society broke overnight. Markets that used to be the heartbeat of the city became war zones. Neighbors turned on neighbors for a handful of flour. The invisible guardrails that keep a society civilized, law, order, basic empathy, completely dissolved. That's the darkest lesson of 70 AD. A city isn't just its concrete, stone, or skyscrapers. A city is an invisible contract built on trust and shared infrastructure. Once you burn that contract, the walls don't matter anymore. Jerusalem still had its massive defenses. It still had the temple. From 5 miles away, it still looked like a superpower. But on the inside, it was already dead. The destruction didn't begin when the Roman legions breached the gates. It began when the city could no longer hold itself together.
When Jerusalem finally fell, the Romans didn't just tear down buildings, they erased an entire reality. The city was leveled, the temple was completely incinerated. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed or sold into slavery. But the deepest trauma wasn't physical, it was the death of certainty. For centuries, the people of Jerusalem believed their system was permanent. Their entire world revolved around it. And in a single historical flashpoint, it was gone. The survivors didn't just have to rebuild their homes, they had to figure out how to exist in a world where the impossible had just happened. And that is exactly why this story still haunts us today. Every civilization, at its peak, believes it is the exception to the rule. We look at our institutions, our economies, and our skyscrapers, and we think they're permanent because they're working today. But history has a 100% track record. Systems don't fail because of one bad day. They fail slowly, quietly, over decades, while everyone is busy buying groceries, scrolling through their phones, and pretending the cracks aren't real. If this story changed how you look at the stability of the modern world, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Because the deeper you look into the past, the more you realize destruction always begins when everything still looks completely normal.